This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane, Pittman and Olgun Ulich coming to you after a dramatic day in Lille on the men's basketball Pool A. The Boomers are through to the quarterfinals. That's all the news you need to worry about right now. And over the next half an hour or so, we're going to break down just exactly what went down for this to be the case. The Boomers lose to Greece 77-71, Olgun, and then a crazy finish between Canada and Spain. The Boomers needed Canada to win this game. Spain were trying to win to stay alive. Greek fans were all implicated in this as well. But in the end, I told you, oh, Canada. They did it. They did it. Canada, Spain, you tried to take Australia down again, but not today. Not today, my friends. The Boomers are in the quarterfinals.
It got very close, too. It was a Sergio Yul prayer to send in that to overtime. That was a stressful game. I know barely any of the players were there watching it. They were watching from home. The Boomers they've fallen into the quarterfinals. They have crawled into it. They have accidentally somehow qualified for the quarterfinals in these Paris Olympics. I don't know how confident they're feeling going into it, given the group phase and the fact that they're 1 and 2. But now it's sort of the group phase is done. That's behind them. It is do or die. All bets are off, basically. It's just one foot after the other at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting because certainly there will be excitement that we get to watch the Boomers again. But I think on social media, it's being crazy negative from what I'm seeing and the comments that I'm seeing about this team. But when we talk about a group of death in Canada and Spain, and you go through and you say, well, if you're 1 and 2 in Greece, obviously today, you go 1 and 2 in the group. And maybe this is the benefit of being in a group of death because every team can beat the other. And it actually allows you to finish second in the group. Point differential really matters in the end. So that initial win over Spain did matter. And I actually did text Brian Goorjian straight after and tried to get a sense for how his ticker was going after this game just finished. And he said, you know what, the second half of this game saved us. So you're right. It wasn't perfect, but when you're down 17 at halftime to this Greek team and really looked horrible in the first 20 minutes, they played good basketball in the second half. And there were moments in this game, whether it's free throws, whether it's missed layups, whether it's open corner threes that just didn't go down. They actually had a real chance to win this game. They were in the box seat. It felt like at times in the fourth quarter, they weren't able to get over the hump. But this is what we love about the group stage. This is what we love about tournament basketball. Point differential matters. And the fact that the Boomers didn't drop their bundle and say, well, this is all too hard. Giannis is dominating. He's got 15 points at the half. That means they fight to live another day. And they've only won one game. And you can focus on the negatives, and we'll certainly talk about some of them. This is also a team that has played some really good basketball in stretches, but now it's knockout, win or go home.
The points differential piece of this whole tournament is so fascinating to me because that was the difference between... So Spain goes into this game against Canada this evening, and if they win, they're top of the group. If they lose, they finish fourth. Wow. Right? It was one or it was the top or the bottom, right? Dyson Daniels hit a 3 at the end of that Australia-Spain game. In hindsight, that was unbelievably important. At the time, we said, it's just probably going to be somewhat important. Spain went on a slight run to end their game against Greece. That almost mattered, and it could be the difference between Greece getting through to the quarterfinals and not. They have to wait for an outcome between Serbia and South Sudan. So the points differential piece of this was so fascinating. The fact that a 12-point win for the Boomers over Spain in their first game of this group ended up being practically a blowout in this group. And that ended up being really, really important because of this loss. And then at the end of this game, Kane, Matthew Dellavedova, who I thought was really, really good in this game, turned the ball over late. The Boomers were down 7. They had to not lose by 9. Well, they had to not lose by 10, right? It was 9 or less they had to lose by if they weren't going to win the game. Delhi turns it over in the final 20 seconds. Greece has a chance to hit a 3. I think Kalathis is off and the Boomers go, and it's only a 6 or 7 point deficit. But my goodness, the points differential have mattered. It's been wild. And thankfully, quarterfinals is do or die. We don't have to worry about points differential anymore.
Yeah, and it does matter because obviously, when you get to that stage, you just want to advance, but not being a third-place team, which almost guarantees that you'll play either one of Team USA, firstly, who you don't want to play in the quarterfinal, but the seeding matters as well. So the fact they're able to somehow finish second with a 1-2 record, you take that and run as well. Let's get into this game a little bit. Let's talk about the first half in particular. We spoke yesterday about what the Boomers were going to do, if anything, how they were going to slow down or try and contain Giannis. I mentioned the fact he had 15 points, he had 6 rebounds, he had 3 assists. He was only averaging 2.5 assists per game leading into this. So at halftime, the Boomers' offense was absolutely nowhere. So take it wherever you want. But we said, what are they going to do with Giannis? And I thought in the first half, yes, they defended him or tried to, basically straight up with Nick Kay. There wasn't a lot of double teaming. It didn't work all that well, but there were also opportunities off missed shots and turnovers that allowed Giannis to work in space. That's not going to go well.
No, and we spoke about the personnel on this Boomers team going into this game and who they have to throw at Giannis, and it's just not great, right? And again, it's very difficult to find anyone who's super effective at guarding Giannis. But when your options are sort of Nick Kay and then Jock Landale and then Dyson Daniels, you're always giving something up, and it's always something significant. So in the first half, there were a ton of times where I think the pickup points on Giannis were really, really high. And so Giannis, being a really mobile, agile big, is able to just put it on the floor and get on the rim. And he was able to get a ton of line drives to the rim, use his agility, use his touch around the rim and get those layups. And then any mismatch, and Giannis has that size advantage. I thought the Boomers largely helped off the wrong people in the first half as well, whether it was Thomas Walkup or Opals. I thought Greece was just sort of working on all cylinders. They were clicking really, really well. They were in rhythm, and they looked really big. I thought that was the difference in the first half. I thought Greece looked really big on both ends of the floor. Were able to turn Australia over, run out as well. They did that in the Olympic qualifying tournament where they turned Slovenia over a lot. Were able to get on the rim and get easy buckets. I thought they did that in the first half against Australia. That's been Australia's Achilles heel so far in this tournament. Greece was able to make the most of it.
Yeah, and I thought, or I certainly probably wanted to see a little bit more of a wing guarding Giannis. I saw a lot of people tweeting about Diabol, but my reaction to that was, well, you've got Dyson Daniels right there and he's not guarding him. So what makes you think that Diabol would be doing the job even if he was here? It wasn't really what was going down. It wasn't what the plan was. I was just a little bit surprised.
Did we see any of it? Did we see any Dyson on
one or
Giannis?
Two possessions? Yeah, 1 or 2 possessions. Now, I understand it because a lot of the times Giannis wasn't bringing the ball up the floor. It was Kalathis. Interestingly, in the first half, the one time Giannis did bring the ball up the floor, he just breezed straight by Nick Kay for a layup. And that's when you've got a big on him, it's going to be problematic. And I think that the thing that surprised me was that they weren't showing Giannis a lot of bodies, or they weren't bringing those double teams in the first half when he caught the ball on the elbow or in the post. And it makes it tough because if you give up the position to Giannis because you say, okay, well, I want to be behind him, I want to get position, and you basically allow him to catch the ball, he's just going to turn, he's going to spin either way, and he's going to finish around you or over you. So they just really had no resistance in that first half. Brian Goorjian said after the game that he thought it was the offense, that they weren't able to get set in the half court. I didn't think they looked great even when they were in the half court defensively. They just looked a little bit a step off in this game, and they were frustrated after the game. The offense was also problematic, though. We've discussed this, and through the first 2 games, Josh Giddey's been the best player on the floor by a mile at halftime. He went into this one, he had a couple of free throws, but he hadn't made a shot, and he didn't have an assist. Patty Mills started well, knocked down a couple of jump shots, then he struggled. He was 3 for 10 at halftime. The 3-point shots weren't really falling either. So on both ends of the floor, it was a pretty troubling first half. And then you add into that the fact that Dyson Daniels went down with a knee injury that was highly concerning when he left the floor. So it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster in the first 20.
Yeah, and I point to the turnovers. And because for me, the turnovers means that other teams can run out. And it's something that Australia's done a lot over these first few games, which is live ball turnovers. So it allows other teams to go get easy buckets. And that means that Australia isn't able to set up their defense. So they're not able to get stops and run and get stuff in transition and semi-transition. So that affects their offense. And because they're not allowed to do that, then, they're getting scored on. They're walking the ball up the floor. And I feel like, and there's nothing reliable enough in the half court when it comes to what this Boomers does offensively. And so I feel like the turnovers are sort of like the key issue that's affecting everything else. It's ruining the entire flow of the game for the Boomers. I thought in the second half, the offensive execution was way better. And I think a lot of it was in large part to just multiple ball handlers on the floor at the same time. So we saw a lot of Giddey Exum and Delhi on the floor at the same time. And I think that extra little creation pop was probably helpful for this team in just getting that ball whipping around and finding guys and finding openings and things like that. That was a lineup that I thought was really good in the third quarter. And again, we'll see how far this team goes, but it's a lineup I want to see more of. I want to see Giddy and Delhi on the floor together. I want to see Exum and Giddy on the floor together.
I think that I thought, and it's so difficult because we also saw minutes in the second quarter, third quarter where Dwight Reith played, and they were going two big lineups. So we actually haven't seen a lot of with the Magne Reith or Reith Landau, Nick Kay out there as well. We haven't seen as much of that. And I thought that even though you're playing Giannis and you think, okay, well, we need to go big, but I was wondering whether the chaos and the athleticism, being able to show bodies at Giannis and then recover to the 3-point line, whether we would see a little bit more of that, to your point. But it is interesting. I mentioned that Giddy struggled in the first half in this game. And it wasn't so much that he was off the floor or he wasn't a part of it, because I actually thought Giddy got going in the third quarter. He had an assist to Landau roll into the basket. He knocked down a three. He was starting to get the game going. But the interesting substitution that was made in the third quarter that you referenced was the fact that Josh Green wasn't a part of that. And Green was great against Spain without scoring, but they also do need as much scoring as they can get. And if you are going to play Nick Kay minutes, he's not really going to score for you. And then if you have a Josh Green out on the floor that hasn't scored a single bucket, a single point in the whole tournament so far, then you're just highly, highly limited. And it's not so much that Daly was necessarily out there to score, although he did knock down 1-3. He was a guy that was able to bring the defensive pressure. And then say what you want, whether you think that he's a threat from the outside, whether he's a threat with the ball in his hands, but he actually can bring the ball up the floor and make the right passes and make the right moves. So when you think about all the youth on this team, ultimately, when the Boomers were in the biggest trouble that they've been in Lille so far, Gorge went back to Matthew Dellavedova, and he said that this is what I brought him for. When things get rough, when things get all messed up, I know I can at least put him out there for 5 minutes. And I was surprised when I looked at the final box score. Delly only played 7.5 minutes. Now, most of those came in the second half, but it felt like it was really impactful, and it was a big reason why that margin was able to come down.
Yeah, so Josh Giddey is 21. Dyson Daniels is 21. Dante Exum is, I think, you've called him a steadier. He's super reliable as a ball handler and as a creator for this team. But the idea of having another one, someone who is seasoned, who's been there before, there's value in that. And that's where, in a game like this, where Josh Green, over this entire tournament, hasn't really found his rhythm offensively, I feel like this coaching staff feels as though you can't really afford to have him out there in long stretches, because you need someone reliable because of how important these minutes are, how important these possessions are. So Delhi is that guy. That's someone who I think they have a lot of trust in, and he plays with with a level of assertiveness. And it's not just defensively where he picks up full court and he plays the passing lanes, and he obviously gives 120%, and that's super important. But offensively, he's probably the most sort of natural playmaker on this team outside of Josh Giddey. And honestly, playing those two together with the way that Giddey is shooting the ball and the way that Delhi does have the capacity to shoot the ball. Obviously, neither are no-leave shooters by any means, but they shoot it respectfully enough that you can play them together. And I think the offense that has been largely stagnant in the front court can actually be effective with those two on the floor. And I'm surprised that this coaching staff didn't go smaller. I get the idea of having to guard Giannis, but Greece went small. They didn't start Papagiannis, right? They started Mitoglu instead. I want to see that lineup that we saw in the third quarter that had Giddey, Delhi, Exum, and then it was Reith and Landau. Let's say it's Josh Green. What if it's Dyson Daniels at the 4 instead, and see what that can do as far as being really switchy and scrambly defensively, and also having some dynamicism offensively. That's a lineup that I wouldn't be surprised if they start to lean into a little bit. I'd like to see more of it.
It's interesting because I think when people now, and this is all part of it, the conversation is bigger than just in isolation looking and saying, well, okay, well, this is the game that you need Matisse Thybulle. And again, I'm not suggesting I had him in my team, but I think when we were budgeting for what we thought each guy was going to bring to the table, we had Josh Green as a potential starter, but certainly a guy that's going to play 15 to 20 minutes. So the fact that he only plays 4 minutes in this game, he didn't have a big impact against Canada in the last game as well. That really is not something that I calculated for, because we've seen him play important minutes in the NBA Finals just recently. He was key at the World Cup last year in stretches as well. So that has changed it a little bit. And Exum being so reliable is really important. Dyson Daniels been better than, even if you were optimistic, I think that he's been better than that. And again, today he hit a couple of big threes. He first play of the game's drawn up for him on a backdoor cut for a layup. So yeah, Daniels has really risen to prominence. But I agree. I still think against the better teams, as we're going to continue to see now, the offense needs more guys that can do stuff. And I still think ultimately it's going to be a limited role for Daly. But I think between Patty Mills, and you can have your thoughts on him today, but I think, again, we still saw the shots aren't falling necessarily as much as you would want. But we saw that he brings something that no one else has. And I'm not saying that you have to enjoy it at home, but there is a level to this where you have to live and die with whether he can make shots. And you might not like it, but the importance and the responsibility for him to be a scorer at this Olympics is still so important. And as you move forward to the next games, that's the big problem. Where can you fill that role? Because this offense is limited. It needs things to be perfect. And that's why they keep on talking about the defense being so important for this team, because they have to scrap for easy buckets. Because when they get into half court, things get tough.
I don't know what this coaching staff has to do to figure out a way to get Josh Green going. I don't know if it's you have to draw up an action for him, or I don't know how you empower him.
He's not really that guy, and he hasn't been that guy for a long time. I mean, he has been in years past, but he hasn't played that style of basketball. So it's just challenging. If he's not a guy that is going to come off the bench and have a primary defensive matchup and try and rebound, and there wasn't really that guy necessarily today for Greece, then he's not going to, unless he's hitting threes, he's not going to be even as impactful to me as what we've seen Dyson so far in the tournament.
And I agree with that. But for me, I look at Dyson being 21 years old, and when he got injured, it's sort of the selection process just flashed before my eyes, right?
Yeah,
exactly. We had been speaking a lot about having Matisse. If you don't want to have him in your rotation, have him there as the insurance for a case like this, right? Whether someone gets injured or someone is just young and maybe they're not up to it in a certain game. I agree with you that I didn't expect Josh Green to have these sorts of struggles. But I feel like this team, I get they're really good. They're ostensibly really good defensively, and that's what they have to hang their hat on. But I feel like there's going to be a point where you need the production from Josh Green. You're gonna need some output. And I don't know if they're just going to completely abandon it and lean straight into Delhi and trust the creation and whatever production you can get from him. But I just think the talent is just there's so much potential with Josh Green to be an offensive force of some nature that you have to figure out how to get something out of him. I think he's too good and he can help this team too much for him to be sort of like rotting on the bench. I feel like you have to figure out a way to implement him into what you do, because I just feel like it's an opportunity wasted.
It's interesting because I asked Gorge specifically, what's going on in his eyes with Josh Green, because he has been so important in the past. And he wasn't wrong when he just said that, look, we love him. He's been important to this team. We think he still can be. But in this game, once we got down 13, 14, 15 points, we had to make a decision. And he wasn't able to have an impact in his first half minutes. So it was kind of desperation stakes. It was either make a move now and make a big decision now and bring Daly in and live with the results, or if not, you're going home. So I actually don't think it's necessarily going to mean that he's going to be on the bench next game. I expect Green to be in the rotation, but the fact that it got to that is concerning. He had one corner three earlier in the game that went off the side of the backboard, and that's the concerning thing, is that confidence in these small tournaments is probably easy to lose and maybe hard to get back on the run in rhythm. The Boomers now are going to have 2-3 days off before they play their next game. We obviously don't know the opponent or what time that is as we record this, but maybe a couple of days, a change of scenery, get out of Lille, head to Paris. Maybe that helps him. I don't know, because you're right. He has in the past, and coming into this, we thought he's going to have a big tournament if the Boomers are going to make a run.
And I agree with the sentiment today that he wasn't feeling it. He's been a little bit hit or miss the last few games. Lean into Delhi, right? And Delhi came on and he punched him in the face, right? And that was great. And I get leaning into that in this instance. I'm more talking down the line, going into the next game, whether it's against a Germany or a Serbia or a France or whomever it is. The idea of having someone like Josh Green feeling himself going into that game is probably really important for this team. I feel like he's just too talented to not try your best to get something out of him, because if you can get something out of him, I think that is more valuable than what Delly or Joe Ingles or whomever the replacement in those minutes are.
So Delly plus 10 in his 7 minutes on the floor. The big man, what did you say? I mean, Nick Kay played a lot. I know that I've said it before, he's an easy target, and I've been someone that said, would you put him off the bench? Would the minutes come down a little bit? He played another 28 minutes tonight. Only Patty Mills played more than Nick Kay. I don't think it's a surprise based on what we've seen. I'm not inclined personally to blame Nick Kay for Giannis getting off the chain early in this game, because I think there were a lot of other factors that contributed to that. And quite honestly, like, swap Nick Kay with whoever you want. If they're asked to guard one-on-one, I don't think they're going to have any luck at all. So I don't personally blame that for him. I think that overall the team defense wasn't there. There will be fingers pointed at Brian Goorjian and the coaching staff for lineups and those types of things. But what did you think of the decision to go with Duop Reith? Now, Will Magnay picked up a couple of fouls as well, trying to guard Giannis. So clearly this was a game where you're probably going to use a bunch of those bodies. But Reith came in. They actually won his minutes on the floor. He had some good moments. He had the big block. He did a couple of athletic things. Then he missed the three and he had a poor turnover. So it was a bit all over the place. And I do think that this is one of the big questions still with this team, because if we listen to our viewers and our listeners of this podcast, we do continually hear a lot about Duop Reith. They saw a little bit today. I think it was a mixed bag. But it does feel like one of the positions on this team that they haven't quite figured out outside of Jock Landale, who once again was a beast in this game and continues to be so important.
Firstly, the Boomers can win by 1,000 points, and there'll still be comments down below saying that Duop Reith should have played. Right? We know this. The Boomers can win. The Boomers can win every game by 1,000 points, and we'll still get, why isn't Duop Reith playing? And Matisse should have been there. Right? At this point, this is the team they have, and you're either going to lean into it or you just, or I don't. On the big man lineup, again, Jock Landale was great. He has to stay on the floor. I think that's unbelievably important, because this coaching staff hasn't really figured out who his most effective backup is, and it's matchup dependent. It's who's playing well. Jock Landale has to stay on the floor, and he was in foul trouble today. We've seen him getting in foul trouble in the past as well. I think he's too good to be in foul trouble, as in he's too important for this team. He's seemingly 100% from the field whenever he catches it on the low block. He's a good roll option. He's on the O boards as well. He's doing everything. I thought Will Magnay's minutes were largely fine today. This is a weird game to make judgments on how these guys played, because it was against a really unique opposition in Giannis, right? He is not a normal sort of big man to go up against, so it's very tough to actually make judgments on how the Australians did. I didn't really love the Duop at the 4 minutes. I wasn't the hugest fan of that, but I'm also not a huge fan of what Nick Kay is bringing offensively as well. He was ostensibly brought to be that guy on this team because he could shoot it better than Xavier Cooks can, but Nick Kay hasn't made a three this tournament yet. He's shooting 1.5 attempts a game from downtown, hasn't made one yet. He's not a threat on the offensive end. And so it's not Nick Kay is fine. Defensively, he is solid. I think because of some of the deficiencies the Boomers have offensively, I'd like them to lean small. I want them to go with Exum, Giddy, Daniels, whomever at the 4, and have Jock Landale at the 5, and even bump up Jack McVeigh's minutes. The idea of any three of your sort of bigger guards / wings with McVeigh and Landale, I really like the balance of that team. And I think if you surround McVeigh with those bigger guards and wings, you can give him enough sort of insurance and help defensively that I think it's super palatable. There's some lineups I want to see. I don't like the idea of going big and slow. I'd rather go more dynamic or more shooting.
Yeah, McVeigh, 10 minutes today, and he hits the 1-3 that when the Boomers were just trying to cling on in that first quarter. It was important at the time, but this did feel like a bad matchup there. And yeah, we've wondered defensively, what does it look like the deeper you get when you play the better teams? Now, having said that, I thought he was pretty good against Canada. So I'm not shaken by that. You got Giannis playing at the 4 in this game. It's, as you said, very different to any other team that you're going to come up against, but it didn't feel like a McVeigh day, even though you probably desperately needed the points in the 3-point shooting. I'm not saying who shouldn't be here, but I'm telling you who I was sitting back today thinking to myself, man, I wouldn't mind that man on the floor. And that was Xavier Cooks. because you have the athleticism at the 4 position. You've got someone that can play above the rim, because this was my whole thing coming into this tournament. We had the discussion, go back and listen to the podcast from a few weeks ago. I said, it's okay in theory to say, well, we're going to have guys in this team because they can shoot threes or they're floor spacers, but you're only a floor spacer if the opposition cares if you're shooting threes. And if the opposition wants you to be shooting threes, then my friend, you're not a floor spacer. So we've said that this team is going to struggle with the outside shooting. And I think that we've seen it come to the fore. Now, they had good looks today, and someone like Exum and Daniels and all these guys that have actually shot the ball pretty well, and McVeigh's been really handy. But if you don't have the guys that can do it off the dribble, you got to have those guys knocking down those open threes, and they weren't able to do it today. The Boomers 9 for 26 from three. It's not a bad percentage, 35, but it felt like they needed a little more.
And let me say this: I think McVeigh. I think you tweeted this. It just seems as though every shot feels like it's going in. Between McVeigh and I think Dyson Daniels, you just have two gamers there.
Yeah.
And it's basically whenever something's needed, they're able to produce. They bring something. You know, the offense is stagnant. Jack McVeigh picks and pops for a three or hits something in the corner, or Dyson Daniels comes off an on ball and turns into an elite point guard, or he hits a three. Those guys are just coming up big in really important moments. And that is so important in a tournament like this, where just, again, I point back to that game against Spain, and Dyson Daniels hits a three in the corner, and that may be the difference between getting through to the quarterfinals immediately and not. I think those two have come up really big, and they're two who I think were question marks coming into this campaign when it came to what their production is actually going to be, but I think they've both stepped up really well.
And I think that's why when we look at these guys, and again, no one wants to hear it, but the program is going to be better in 4 years, and we think even better in 8 years' time from where it is right now. But that's why when you see guys do stuff offensively that's really out of the box, you like sit up in your seat and go, holy crap, I wasn't expecting that. Dante Exum had a couple of those moments today, and he's a sneaky, aggressive dunker. We've seen him do this in Europe. We've seen him do this at times in the NBA, and he put down a massive dunk through contact today with the right hand. A few minutes after that, I mentioned it, he had a step back three off the dribble that I was like, holy, we are not used to seeing this from Dante Exum there. So that's why just the little moments, it feels like the Boomers are going to need a lot to continue to move through. But also, maybe I just look at it differently, because as I said, there is a lot of negativity about, this team sucks, the coaching stuff sucks, everything sucks. And I kind of sit back and say, look, you're 1-2. You would have loved to have won another one of these games, but this was the most brutal group in the Olympics. The goal was just to get out of here, and now you're a couple of wins away from putting yourself in a position to win a medal. And maybe you don't get there, but this is just a ridiculous tournament. And I don't know whether you look at it on paper and look at the offensive firepower this team has, it makes some sense that maybe you can't keep up with the Greece. Maybe you can't keep up with the Canada when you just look at who the number one guy is. Sometimes it just comes down to that.
Yeah, if going into this tournament, I feel like if you told everyone that this Boomers team would advance to the quarterfinals, and let's say it's against Serbia, and let's say they lose to Serbia, I think people would consider that a relatively successful campaign.
No, well, they won't. That's what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying.
And
I'm not saying you have to accept mediocrity, to be clear. Like, the bar should be where the bar is. But I also think you have to sit back and acknowledge how good this tournament is and where the other teams are at. Every other group has had a game against a team where you're like, okay, you should just go through and win that. The Boomers didn't have that. And you mentioned Serbia, and that's a real possibility in a quarterfinal. So if you go Canada, SGA, Greece, Giannis, Serbia, Nikola Jokic, you've got the top three in the NBA MVP. Was Giannis third? Well, he's top five. He was top five. I don't think he was top three.
You have like maybe
MVP.
the three best. You have maybe the three best players on earth right now.
Yeah.
And yeah. So, but I'm saying that the expectations going into this tournament, I don't think were crazy high, because we knew that this Boomers team wasn't perfect, and we knew the strength of the entire Olympic field. So just getting to the final eight would be an achievement in its own right, and they've gotten there. Yes, they've sort of limped over the line, but they have gotten there. I think the outcomes is what's maybe putting people off. It's the fact that I thought it was a pretty good win over Spain. I thought all the indicators were good in that game, and I thought the loss to Canada was, yes, there were some things here and there that we didn't like, but I thought it was largely good from Australia. I think now it's just because this loss, the first half especially, was really, really poor from Australia. I think that's the thing that's sticking in people's mouths. And so it's like, how have they qualified for the quarterfinals after a performance like that? And I think that just doesn't sit well with people. But again, in totality, from the games in Abu Dhabi to now, I think the Boomers have been largely good and shown largely good indicators, to the point where whomever they face in the quarterfinals, just like going into every one of these group phase games, I don't think it's an outright that other team is the favorite to win. I think it might be the other team is slightly favored, but the Boomers have every chance to win it, because I think we've seen enough indicators over the course of these group phase games.
Yeah, I think deep in my gut, I'm not sure that I expected the Boomers to be as competitive as they have been, not just here in Lille, because we thought that they could advance. I thought they were a real chance to advance. But going back through some of those teams they played in the exhibition games as well, and maybe I'm just tainted a little bit because you go to these press conferences in the post game, and everyone, whether it's the players, whether it's the coaches, they're saying the same thing. We sat down with Giannis for about 15 minutes tonight after the game. And yes, he was disappointed in Greece. We don't know whether they're going to move forward. But he also kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, well, we played Spain, a powerhouse in Europe. We played Canada, who everyone thinks is the second best team behind USA. And we played an Australian team that won the bronze medal a few years ago in Tokyo. And as we saw in the second half, he said they put on a clinic on both sides of the ball. So high praise from Giannis. But the point is that everyone in this group has acknowledged from the start that they can play games where they play, whether it's in patches, or they can play games where they play really well and they still might lose. So it's almost like there was a feeling of inevitability from these teams that were in that group that were just like, man, like, I hope we get through, but this is crazy. And probably a little bit of annoyance that they aren't in one of the other groups when they watch some of the blowouts that we've seen over the other side of the draw. So the fact that you can go 1-2 and then your point differential of, what was it, Australia's final point differential? 12 minus 6 is 6, and whatever they lost to Canada the other day. So, I mean, these games were tight. This whole group was tight. And anyone that expected Australia to go through 2-1 or 3-0, I think you're kind of kidding yourself.
No, I agree. I'm going to put you on the spot, because
Yes,
I'm just having a think of, and we'll both have stories dropping on ESPN.com.au on our reaction to this game and the group phase in general. I want you to give me, and I promise we haven't prepared for this, so I'm putting Kane on the spot, something that you liked from these group phase games and something you didn't like. Starting with whichever one you wish.
Yeah, well, I think you pointed to it earlier in the show. The thing that I've liked, and this is, again, it's in the now, but it's projecting ahead, is the fact that we're looking at two guys with Josh Giddey and Dyson Daniels in the backcourt that are already taking on far more responsibility than you really ever see for two guys in the backcourt at this level of competition. Like, it's just rare to have two guys that are at 21 and taking that on. And Dyson in particular, he struggled through opportunities so far in the NBA. We've seen him play defense to an elite level, but he hasn't had a chance to thrive. He hasn't had a chance to be aggressive. He hasn't had a chance to expand his offensive game. And we've seen what happens with a little bit of confidence, and also the entire group getting around him and saying, hey, we know that you're young. We know that you haven't played a lot in the NBA, but we believe you are one of our most important players. So that gets me excited, seeing him even today have moments where you can go off the floor and you could be holding your knee and it looks like you've done something serious. And within 10 minutes, you're back out there knocking down threes from the outside. You're playing key defensive possessions on that end of the floor. So to me, Dyson Daniels and Josh Giddey, I don't know what it means for this tournament and winning a medal, but when I look ahead, like, I've been watching those two on the floor, and I'm excited as an Australian watching them grow, like, right in front of us, and then what it might look like moving forward to the NBA and, of course, like the following Olympics. So to me, that's unquestionably been the big positive or the big like for me.
Yeah, they have a good connection as well, just the two of them and working off each other. Dyson's a good cutter. Giddey's obviously a really good passer. I think one of the questions for both of them was the shooting, and both are shooting over 40% from three on a good amount of attempts as well. Granted, very, very small sample size, but you need them to make shots, and they are making shots. Outside of Victor Wembanyama, what other 21-year-olds or younger are really making an impact in the Olympics right now? Is it just Giddey, Daniels, and Wembanyama?
I think to that level, starting, we're probably forgetting someone, to be fair, but it is rare. I think that's the only thing that we can say to really highlight it. Like, this is not normal. So if you have different frustrations along the way, we spoke about it with the Opals yesterday, and they're trying to blood Jade Melbourne and Izzy Ball Lace. These young players taking on this responsibility, it's not always going to be perfect. Certainly the Boomers guys have been better than I probably expected, just because you think against this level of competition under that pressure, maybe you'll have moments that you struggle a little more than what we've seen. I think they've been better than that. But that's the big like for me. Is there anything else for you, or you want to go straight to the dislike?
I'm just largely a negative person, so I'm really cool to. Also, it's 5 a.m. I'm really cool to just go full steam ahead toward the end of this episode. Give me. I have a few dislikes, but you got one at the top of your head?
Yeah, I dislike, and it's more of a broad problem that we've discussed a lot. And whether you go back to the team selection, whatever it may be, the offense is it's hard. It's hard to watch the offense in the half court try and function because they don't have the guys. So it's not necessarily a dislike with anyone. But then we've asked the question, well, how can you be a little bit more dynamic? And I do think more than you will read online, I do think that there has been more changes to the rotation. In every single game, you can point to moments where different levers have been pulled that weren't pulled in the last game. So you can't sit back and say that the coaching staff is just saying, well, this is it. We've organized our substitution pattern at breakfast, having scrambled eggs at the village with a latte and just regular milk, because I got told the other day they don't have non-fat milk in France, which you have to respect. And maybe I need to get a life and don't worry about the low-fat milk. But I think that we've seen them pull different levers. So, in general, just the thing that can be frustrating at times in games is the fact that they don't have the firepower that other nations do. They don't have the shooting that other nations do, and it puts you in a challenging position right from opening tip.
Yeah, for the story I'm writing for the website. I was going through just the overall stats and some of the team stats over the Olympic field, and the things that stood out to me when I was just looking through it. One was something I mentioned before: is Nick Kay having not made a three. Just the inability to get any sort of perimeter production out of that 4 spot, especially with how effective I think Josh Giddey is at getting 2 feet in the paint, and how effective Jock Landale is at just being a monster inside the paint. Being able to get some sort of production from the perimeter from that 4 spot, I think would be super important. Patty Mills is shooting 30% from 2. I think that's almost a sign that his role should not necessarily be diminished, but should shift.
Hey, I want to. We got to 38 minutes in the podcast before you said Patty Mills' role should be diminished, which you deserve a medal.
I said the exact opposite of that. I said, I'm not saying his role should be diminished. I think it should be shifted. Okay. I like the idea of the ball in Josh Giddey's hands and him being the main creator, and Patty Mills being someone who can be gravity or set back picks or come off curls and things like that. And then when Josh Giddey's not on the floor, and yes, Josh Giddey needs to clean up those turnovers. We've been talking about it since the China games. He has to do that. When Josh Giddey's not on the floor, or even when he is on the floor, I want the ball in Dante Exum's hands. I think he is the ideal secondary creator on this team, someone who can get 2 feet in the paint. And if Patty Mills is there as, again, someone who is setting back picks, or is that guy in the splits action, or is just gravity in a corner, I think that opens everything up for Giddey and Exum and these guys to be effective. And I want Delly to get more minutes. And I think Dyson Daniels could do some creation too. And I think Patty could be the perfect gravity to help those guys be effective. I don't like the idea of Patty dribbling the air out of the ball, right? Or trying to maneuver inside the paint. He's too small for that. He doesn't create the same separation. I think his elite skill is his shooting and his gravity, and I'd like for the Boomers to lean into that more, lean into the creation of the other guys as opposed to the opposite, leaning into the creation of Patty Mills, which I don't think is at the level of some of those other guys.
Yeah, I just, for the most part, because to your point, and everyone knows that's been listening to this for the last few weeks, I feel like I'm alone on an island by myself on Patty Mills Island at the moment. I've lost a lot of friends over the last year, it feels like. But again, a lot of it is circumstance. But the one thing I'll say when you talk about putting a ball on the floor, I don't have the stats in front of me, but if I had to guess, I would think it's pretty ugly for Patty Mills around the rim at the moment. It just feels like every single shot is getting blocked. And maybe that speaks to the athleticism and the rim protection and the versatility of different nations and how the game has changed a little bit, and the fact that he's 36 years old. But I actually have liked, and this is when I say earlier in the show that it feels like at times Australia is just going to have to live and die by whether he can hit either the three or the mid-range in particular, because he still actually is able to create separation, not when he's going to the basket as much, we've seen that, but when he's able to get to the mid-range, he's getting tremendous looks, like perfect looks, mid-range jump shots, and some of them haven't just gone down, and we've been so used to for years him knocking down those mid-ranges. So I agree, he doesn't need to run the offense. You've got Josh Giddey, a class point guard there, but Patty Mills coming off those girls, getting to the mid-range, pulling up on a dime, being fouled on a couple of three-pointers in this tournament so far. That stuff's really important. I agree, getting to the rack doesn't look like it's in the kit bag anymore.
I agree, and I think we're generally on agreement.
Of course,
right?
I just want to see if I can piss you off at 5 a.m.
You can't rattle me, Kane.
Okay.
You're the one who has a big drive tomorrow, so that's
Don't get me started. That's some inside workings going on over here, and the people don't need to hear about it. But it's tough.
You're so brave about to do the drive to Paris.
Tough.
You poor thing.
You know this as well as anyone, and people ask questions and why can't you? No one knows that I'm in the arena because I'm not allowed to take a photo or any of those. It's tough covering these tournaments, Olgs. It's not the good old NBA where you can go in and cover whatever you want to cover. There's just rules and restrictions, and we're bringing the content, Olgs. But it's not necessarily easy.
I know. And again, I think we're largely in agreement with Patty Mills. It's not a role. It's not a diminishing of the role. It's just changing what he does, leaning into the things that I think he's really good at. Outside of that, again, this performance was not great. The first half was not great. The second half was way better. And it got a little bit scary at the end, but the Boomers are through. They're through to the quarterfinals, you guys. They have absolutely fallen into success. And now it's win or go home now. And man, anything can happen. The next game could be the game where Nick Kay hits 5 threes. And that could be the difference between the Boomers getting to a semifinals. And if they do, then they're in line for a potential medal game. So I'm thinking 2 steps ahead, but that's where we are right now. We're at the final 8.
It was almost the perfect encapsulation of what we think of this Boomers team. The offense, the defense, they hold Greece to 24 points and a half of basketball with Giannis on the floor. He only scores 5 points. He was scoreless in the third quarter. That's wonderful. But they still only managed 35 points of their own, and that's going to be challenging. They score 71 points overall. So we'll see who they get in the quarterfinals. We'll be watching with interest tomorrow and later today back home to see who Australia gets in the quarterfinals. There's still some shuffling to happen there. Greece still can make it. They're waiting to see if they're going to be a third-place team. I think there's some ramifications from the South Sudan-Serbia game there. So there's just points in it here or there. The Boomers don't have to worry about that. They've locked in second spot in the group despite being 1 and 2. My last dislike is the fact that Jock Landale doesn't have some sort of extra energy pack that he can chuck on his shoulders and play 40 minutes, because I did ask him. He was very frustrated in the third quarter, but missed in a couple of tip-ins. He missed 5 free throws in the night, which we didn't get into a lot, but geez, that was so costly. And almost, you talk about the point differential, that could have been a factor in costing them a spot in the quarterfinals. Not Jock specifically, because overall he was awesome, but I asked him about the missed tip-ins, the free throws, and he just said, I was effing exhausted. And he goes, I'm not using it as an excuse, but I was just completely out of gas through that stage in the game. So he's doing so much, man. I wish there was some way we could get this man unlimited energy so he could play 40 minutes, because it would change. He's been the game changer, and I think now a little bit of a quieter game for Giddey. If you were having an Olympics MVP, it's probably that man, Jock Landale.
I agree. And the whole not being able to really determine who that backup 5 is, the carryover effect is Jock Landale has the potential to get fatigued and exhausted and may not be as effective as he perhaps should be. But up until this point, he's been unbelievably effective on both ends. And again, I think we've said it every single game. I think he needs more touches. I think he needs more post touches. What they did in the second half of putting him in more on balls, just like singles, just empty side on balls, I thought that was really, really effective. I think they have to lean into him more because he's an elite roller. I think he's looking elite in the post as well. Jock Landale has been, I think Dyson Daniels has been the revelation, but Jock Landale has been the steadying force of this team. I think he's been consistently the best player.
Very well said. All right, that's going to do it on the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour for a couple of days. Now, the Opals, you talk about ramifications. They're coming up against the host nation, France, in the very early hours of Monday morning. So we'll have a post-game pod for you there. And at that point, we'll be able to look ahead to the Boomers quarterfinal coming up in the middle of next week, so early next week, Tuesday here, local time. So a few days off for the Boomers to rest. They're going to head to Paris tomorrow. Olgun, I don't know what you're going to do now because it's 5:06 a.m. and do you sleep through the day? And then I don't know what you're going to do, but we appreciate you being here, of course. And just think
the sun isn't rising. The sun is not rising yet here in Melbourne. It's still dark outside. But give it a few. I'll tell you what I did actually. Sorry to cut you off.
No,
because I was anticipating this all-nighter. I did buy a coffee earlier. I bought an oat latte, a large oat latte. And as the Spain-Canada game was beginning, I put it in a nice saucepan and I slowly brought it up to heat. And I put it in my little tea mug. And I just had an oat latte that I had bought from the cafe around the corner from my place. That is how I am staying functional and active right now. And again, approaching absolute delirium. But as of now, we're doing okay.
Yes, and look, it could have been a worse podcast. We've got another Boomers game to cover in a couple of days' time, so spirits are high. And I will not sing the Canadian national anthem again unless the Boomers are still alive and Canada is matched up with Spain. Canada is matched up with Team USA on the other side of the bracket. I will sing the Canadian national anthem to get the USA out of there as the Boomers continue their charge. I don't know. You got to be optimistic, Ogs.
No, I know. For those wondering, we have to wait. Again, you will listen to this podcast when the Germany-France game is already finished. But the outcome of that game and then the outcome of the Serbia-South Sudan game will more than likely determine who the Boomers face. So it'll more than likely be one of France, Germany, or Serbia. If so, I think either one of those is a pretty decent matchup for the Boomers. Two of them they've faced already, so that'll be interesting to watch. But yeah, they're the games that we're looking at in order to determine who the Boomers are going to face. There are a ton of different complexities with regard to how they're in different pots, but they're the three teams that we're watching right now. All
right, let's wrap it up. The Boomers lose, but then they also win and they advance to the quarterfinals in the Olympics. So it's an interesting tournament. This was an interesting podcast. Kane Pittman, Olgun Ulic, ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour. See you in a couple of days after the Opals. Hopefully they move on to Paris as well. We'll speak to you then.